In the first few centuries of Christianity, it went from less than 1% of the population of Rome in the end of the first century to the dominant religion of Western civilization a couple of centuries later. I mean, something worked, right? That's a plan. So we looked at that and we thought maybe we could imitate the simplicity of that model, use it as a guide for how to run our ministries. We also looked at the CDC guidelines fairly extensively. My plan was to show you how boring I can truly be with CDC slides in abundance. And we read through all the details, some of them more interesting than others, but we read them as much as we could. And the overall summary of the CDC guidelines are smaller groups are safer than bigger groups. Obviously, there's a lot more details in it than that, and I'm going to encourage people to be aware of those. I want to make this clear in case this was misunderstood. This is not a plan that we're advancing in the face of CDC guidelines. We're not saying, well, forget that, we're going to do what we want. What we're saying is, how can we be the church and as much as possible, as feasible, adhere to the guidelines we've been given for public safety? We want to be good law-abiding citizens. We're not anarchists. And if the government says this will be best, it will keep people alive, no matter what we think about it personally, we're going to do our best to adhere to that, because that's the kind of people Christians tend to be. Okay, that's the plan. So the CDC says smaller groups safer than bigger groups. So it would make sense to us then to say, let's try to form some of those smaller groups and see what they can accomplish. The proposal then was, let's start house churches now, right, in the immediate future. I might have confused you by using the words house church. You may be more familiar with the term small group. I used house church because that's the way it's discussed in the New Testament more. But it's the same concept of taking the larger body of saints in an area and also organizing them in smaller groups, like the text in Acts said, in the temple courts and house to house. We're going to operate at both levels as much as we possibly can. The plan was for kind of a pilot program, an experimental program. We're looking for weekly meetings and check-ins of these small groups we're going to form. We're only asking for a 3-month commitment, because I know the tendency is when you agree to do something at church, it's a lifetime sentence that you're stuck, forever. You will never leave that classroom and you'll never get out. We're not doing it that way. This is something where you could feel like you could volunteer for something on a trial basis, and we'll see how it goes. We're going to do it on kind of a trimester system. Even if the pilot program works and we continue into 2021, I still want to do it as a 3-month program where you host for 3 months, we take a month off, reformulate the groups as needed, do 3 more months, and kind of have it as a trimester. So if there is a period of time that you need off for family commitments, health concerns, or you're just sick of people in your house, whatever it is, you don't even have to tell me why. You say, not this time, okay? And so it's going to be pretty simple in that way. We'll have a 1-month break in between, which for this pilot program, we'll do September, October, November, and then nobody wants to have anybody over during December anyway. You got other stuff going on, so that'll be our break month. And then that'll give us time, if this works, we can kind of reformulate for the month of January in the new year. January is a great time to start things. So I think that calendar will probably work. And you'll have the option to either reform your group, scatter your group, whatever you want to do. If you want to have the same group every time, then do that. If you want to try something new, then you certainly can. Okay, now for the clarification part, because inevitably, anytime I'm speaking in front of a microphone, I'm either going to say something I didn't intend to say or confuse you with something I did say. So a little bit of clarification, a little Q&A to make sure that we didn't have any misleading information coming out of last time. First of all, are we ending live worship on Sundays? Absolutely not. The idea for small groups is not to replace our in-person worship. Remember, the church in Acts existed on 2 fronts, in the temple courts and house to house. And our comment is, no, for as long as it is reasonably safe to do so, we'll continue to have Sunday morning worship in our building. The comment I did make, which might have confused some of you, was that in March, we didn't get an option. In March, there was a health crisis brought to our attention. State, local, federal government, CDC, everybody said the same thing. Churches are a place where this could really spread. We'd like to reduce that. And so, again, being good citizens, we said we'll go to online. And so that was a choice that was kind of made for us, and we agreed to it, okay? What I said last time was, it could happen again. Nobody foresaw it happening in the month of March, did we? I didn't, maybe some of you did. I didn't see it coming. I was downplaying it right up until the moment we threw the switch and turned everything off. I was saying, it'll never happen, and then it happened, okay? So the comment I made last time was, if it happens again, we could shut down our in-person worship and still function, hopefully, in some form of small groups, or at the very least, have a small group infrastructure that could check in on each other even if we were in quarantine, you see. So it will be beneficial even in a worst case scenario to have it. But my goal is not worst case scenario. My goal is that our live in-person worship continues to grow and thrive. And then this other thing exists as well and works in concert together with it. It's not one or the other, which is my next question. Do we have to choose between public worship and small groups? Is it I worship one or the other? And again, the answer is no. There's no reason that you couldn't do both. You can do public worship and small groups. They're intended to work together. You're not picking. It's not either or. It's both and. The idea is to have both of these things work together in concert and strengthen what we're able to do as a church. Yeah, but what if my small group wants to worship online, but I want to come worship in person? Very possible scenario. You may be part of a small group that says we'd like to worship and watch the live stream and not be here, but I'd kind of like to be here, okay? What happens then? Well, I'm going to give you some news from your preacher. This is secret religious information here, okay? God will approve if you choose to worship more than once on Sunday, right? And of course, I'm being a little facetious, but you get my point. Like, we kind of get it in our heads. You have to pick. You don't have to pick. You can worship. You could worship 3 times. You could worship. One of my first ministry job was a little church east of Midwest City, and there was a lovely man named Sam Shimwell, who I have nothing but kind things to say about. But he also provided me with lots of sermon illustrations because he was just a constant story in the making. And the way we did services there on Wednesday nights, we'd have our Bible class, and then we'd have a 15-minute devotional. I was down the hall teaching a class of teens, and then came in and was supposed to lead the songs. And on Wednesday night, they didn't hand you a nice list of here's the prayer people. You just looked out, and anybody that made eye contact, you said, would you do the prayer? So that night, I do the song, and somebody gives a devotional. I do the invitation song as we stand and sing, and it's time for the closing prayer. And I point at Sam, and I say, could you do the closing prayer? He said, I already prayed. It's the only time in my life I've ever had anyone tell me that. And what he meant was, during the Bible class, the teacher had called on him for the prayer. And in his mind, I did it once. And he wasn't a bad person in any way, but in his mind, you do it once and then somebody else does it. And so it's the only time anybody ever told me no in that format. And he just looked at me. I already prayed. And I was speechless. Okay, Rick, if you, I think we kind of get it in our heads, that there's kind of a cap on it, that if you worship too much, God might get tired of you. Promise, won't happen. And so if you want, now you might get tired of hearing me if you worship twice a day. If you worship here live and then got together with your group later to worship again, it's going to be the same sermon. Apparently, you'll hear stuff the second time. I didn't know I said the first time, but that's still a possibility. What I'm saying is there's not a cap on it. You make your choices, decide how you want to do it, but there's no lightning that comes down if you decide to get together more than once on Sunday and take communion with a different group of people. I knew a minister who was working in prison ministry, and on Sunday night at that particular prison, they had the ability to go and meet with the inmates and share a communion service. And somebody asked, well, you already took communion this morning. He said, but I hadn't taken it with them yet. There was something about the people you take it with, right, that is as significant or at least connected to the significance of the event overall. And so, he would take it with his church on Sunday morning, and then he would take it with the prisoners Sunday night. So if you want to take it with prisoners on Sunday night, maybe we shouldn't tell people at home they're prisoners, but whoever it is you take communion with, again, I think we'll get by is my point. Can anyone start a small group? I talked about hosts. And someone even asked, can women start small groups? Is there any kind of restraints or controls on that? And again, I'm going to say, no, not really. Anyone can start a small group. There are 6 small group house churches mentioned by name in the New Testament, and exactly 3 of them are associated with a woman host or co-host. In the New Testament, whatever view you take of church and gender and all those questions, which are all very interesting, and I'll talk more about them some other time, in the New Testament, having a church meet in your home was not a question of gender. In fact, quite a few women were the people doing that in the New Testament. So really the threshold is just as simple as I made it last week. Do you have a heart for people? Are you willing to open up a space? Can you serve some food or even not? Can you turn on a video? If you can do those 4 things and you're warm-blooded, if you can do those things, you can be a host of a group, and we'll help you in any way we can. Does the host need to provide food? Depends if I'm going to be there. No, it's really up to you. We're trying to make these as open-ended as possible as to how you actually orchestrate these in your home. I'm always in favor of food, but it's not a requirement. It doesn't have to be fancy. You can do potluck, you can do brown bag. I think when I say the word host, we think of like get out the china type event. I'm hosting a party every week. It doesn't have to be like that. This is supposed to be like having family over for a meal, not trying to impress friends. You know the difference? The way you feed your family on an evening is closer to what we have in mind than a fine dinner party. If you want to do a dinner party, that's on you, but there's no requirement. Paper plates work just fine, or no food at all. We're just going to get together and study and then go home. Let people know, but that's kind of the idea. If I'm going to be there, there should be coffee, but beyond that, there's really no necessary requirement in that department. Can I be a part of more than one group? Here again, I can give you some guidance, but not a hard and fast rule. Why not would be the answer. This is not like a situation where we're going to kind of compartmentalize everybody into groups. If you wanted to participate in more than one group, nothing would stop you. Don't overcommit yourself. Some of these groups will be meeting at different times. And there's always that freshman college student who gets the course catalog and says, I want to take everything. I'm going to take archaeology, and I'm going to take astrophysics, and then just go down the A's and start enrolling in classes. And they burn out in the first semester. That's not a good idea. Okay, so I would say pace yourself. Don't feel like you have to overcommit. But there may be some of us who will be in more than one groups. I was thinking of that myself. I'm in all likelihood going to host some kind of group or co-host a group myself. But I also would kind of like to just be in a group. It's kind of nice sometimes just to be the fly on the wall and not have to be in charge of anything. And so I might be in a second group where I can just sit there and let somebody else do all the work. Right? So you can see where a person might want to do that, and you're welcome to. If somebody's doing a reading or a study that you're interested in and wanted to go to that one, I'm not going to stop you. We're really not policing this. The idea is more engagement, more involvement, not less. So kind of use your own judgment. Okay, so today, a little bit of new material finally. That's the review part. That's the Q&A and clarification. Let's talk about some more details to give you an idea of what we're trying to accomplish. How do we plan a small group or a house church, whatever we want to style it? I've been reading a lot lately from Steve Gladden, who runs the house church ministries at Saddleback. I've been critical of Saddleback my entire life because the Saddleback church is one of these mega churches. So small town churches, we always look at them and say, well, they can't be doing it right. And I get really grumpy. And there are things to criticize about them, to be sure. They've admitted some of their faults in the last decade or so, that it's easier to get people in the building than it is to create disciples. And they'll tell you that right up front. That said, during this pandemic, they're one of the few mega churches that are still operating basically at full capacity, not in their worship service, but because everybody at Saddleback was already in a small group. And so when they throw the switch and turn worship services off, they already had an infrastructure where everybody was already connected. 100% involvement, even at a distance. That's amazing to me, to have several thousand people in a church still engaged when you can't be in the building. So yeah, I picked up a couple of their books and I said, how are y'all doing that? And I was impressed by the simplicity of their answer. What is the agenda for a small group? They'll give you 2 passages. The first is Matthew 22, 36 through 40. "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" And he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like to it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." And the second passage they'll give you, also in Matthew, comes from Matthew 28:19 through 20. "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." And what they've said is they decided to build their entire small group program on those two passages. So when you ask, what can a small group do and what can it be? A healthy small group would have four components coming from these two passages. First of all, there we go. Oh, go back. There it goes. First of all, it'd be a group that worship together. They're going to be devoted to God as their highest goal. To love the Lord their God, to glorify Him, is their first commandment. And so a healthy small group would engage in some form of worship. That might be, in our case, watching the live stream, or just being here in person, or whatever it is. You get some creativity to figure out how that looks. But to spend some time in worship together, because that's the most important thing Christians do in one sense, is to demonstrate love and adoration to God. And worship is one of the simplest and most straightforward ways of doing that. A small group would learn together to make disciples. The word disciple doesn't mean a lot to us in English because we don't use it. Closest might be the idea of apprentice. It's somebody who works alongside with you and learns a craft or a skill. And what we need for Christianity is we need more apprentice making. We need more disciple making. We need to be a people who learn and grow together. Christianity is not a self-help religion. It is a help religion, but not a self-help religion. That it's made to be engaged in with other people. That's where the learning happens. That's where the growth happens. We need mentors. We need teachers. We serve together. Go therefore. Christianity is a go religion. It's a religion of activity where verbs lead the charge. We are going to do things. In the case of the apostles, it was literally get on a boat and go around the world. In our case, it's looking for opportunities for service and outreach in our own community, starting with our own people and then looking everywhere else. Galatians 6 and verse 10 says, "As you have therefore opportunity, do good unto all men, especially those of the household of faith." We start by looking around and then we go. We find opportunities and we take advantage of those opportunities. We're a serving people. And we're a group that cares together. Love your neighbor was the second greatest commandment. And so you look, who is my neighbor? Jesus has a beautiful answer to that in the parable of the Good Samaritan. But for our purposes today, these people, whoever it is, you have the opportunity to help, and especially the people in your small group. Those are your people. Those are your neighbors. And they need to be checked in on. Isolation is not good, okay? There are two health risks during this pandemic, both of them serious. One is a serious virus that is killing people, okay? It's very real, and it's costing lives. The other is the psychological impact of living in ways humans were never meant to live, of being almost permanently isolated. We weren't made for that. And the long-term mental health consequences are going to be staggering. Both of those, not one or the other, okay? Forget partisanship for a moment or the one or the other mood of our country. It's not one of them real and one of them fake. Both of those are very valid and real concerns. Both of them are killing us. Small groups have the ability to answer both of those. We're going to have a reasonable and safe response to the virus crisis, and we're going to respond to the essential human need of interaction with other people, and we're going to find ways to care for each other. Those four things, if I were to make demands, if you were just elect me Pope and make me the Lord over your life, I always offer that. No one ever buys in. But if you would just put me in charge of absolutely everything, every small group would look like this. 4 components. Now, I make that as a joke if you'd make me Pope, because I know in reality, most of my power is in the form of suggestion, right? I get to get up here and say, well, wouldn't this be a fun idea? Here's a proposal, right? Here's a suggestion. And that's all I can do. What your small group actually accomplishes is really going to be up to you. You may pick one of these and say, we're going to do that one really well and not so much the others. And I'll glare at you a little bit, that'll be okay. Right? That's still a small group, and I'm happy that it's working. But in a perfect world where I got everything I wanted, all four of these things are the components of Christian life and would play some role, a balanced role, in these small groups and how they function. So what kind of questions do you need to ask then when you think about, can I form a small group, host a house church myself, or can I be part of one? Here are the kind of questions we want to ask, and they relate to these four ideas. Worship together. How is your group going to share worship? Okay. Could be that you just have an expectation that everyone will be here on Sunday morning, and my group is going to do that, and that's our plan. That's a plan, right? That works. Otherwise, you may say, some of my group is not going to be interested in being here because of concerns for transmission of the virus, and so we're going to set up a plan for us to share this together. We're going to get in one place, maybe 10 of us, and watch the live stream. That's an option. Or we're going to set up a Facebook watch party and comment and talk to each other in that way while we watch it in our homes. There's lots of options for doing this, but you just have to answer the question, how are we going to accomplish worship? Okay? Because this isn't in the place of worship. This is how do we worship? Where are we going to do it? Do you need a space? We can find you space, right? We can help you out. Will you worship at 9:30 and watch it live? Are you going to replay it later, like, where you can pause and make comments like the football commentator? Well, what Ben said here was, don't do that. But whether live or later in the day, you have some options there to kind of figure that out. But that'd be the first set of questions. How is my group expected to engage in worship? And kind of set some guidelines for that. How are we going to learn? Does your group want to do a Bible study? Maybe you just have something you want to teach, and you want to teach it. That's fine. You don't have to teach something. Do you want to do a reading group? There's a book I've been wanting everybody to read. I'm going to get 10 people. We're going to read this book and talk about it once a week. Okay, fine, do that. The church is going to be providing weekly video content from September, October, November. 13 weeks. Already got the PowerPoint made. 13 PowerPoint lessons and 500 typos. I'm still working on it, but I've got it done. And that'll be available from week to week throughout the 3-month period. You can just literally turn it on. And then at the end, this would be your other job as a host. At the end of the video, you ask this deep and penetrating question. What'd y'all think about that? And then just sit quietly while everyone else talks, right? And so that's one option. Do you need something from us related to that? Can I provide you with something that would help? Will you study in person or online? You can get together in a group of 10 or 15 or 20 and watch the video and discuss it. You can do a Zoom get-together. You can call each other up on a phone. Whatever you want to do, there's a million options. You just think about how you want to answer that question. Which brings me to, interruption, I want to talk just briefly about the content that will be available this fall. We're going to put out 2 classes. It took me a while, but I finally made my decision. I'm going to do 2 classes. That'll be available each week, each Sunday. The video content will be available along with the study guide for both of these classes. The first class is on church and gender. It's the last class I taught before coming to Central, and so it's kind of fresh on my mind. And what it is, it's an informational class. What it does is it tries to go through as many as the Old Testament passages as possible, and essentially all of the New Testament passages related to the topic of gender. And it just asks the question, what are the views on these passages? And what it will allow us to do, spoiler, there's about 4 schools of thought on this topic. I'm going to be a preacher and eliminate 2 of them, and then say, let's study these 2 comparatively and see how they read these passages. My goal is for it to be purely informational. If I get all the way to the end and you don't know which school of thought I fall in, I'll have considered that a success. Because my goal is just to provide you with mountains of information so that we're more informed and can better communicate with people who take the other view from us. Because that's really important. So that'll be one class. Now, you may say, that sounds really complicated and deep, and I don't know if I want to get into that. Okay, option number 2 is what I'm calling Apprentice to Jesus, which based on my previous comments today, you may have guessed is a discipleship class. It is a nuts and bolts, ground level, basic introduction to Christian discipleship. And so if you have a group that's mostly new Christians, non-Christians, babes in Christ, literal babes, like children, I mean, whatever you want, right? If that group, you think that would be better for that group, that class will be available. Both classes will be available in video format on Sundays. There will be a study guide provided along with that on Sundays. And then as a bonus, because I know it's not fair for the preacher to teach on gender and then not take any questions, on Wednesdays, I'm going to set up a interactive format so people can say, hey, I had a question about your lesson and your heresy on Sunday. Could you answer the following? And I'll respond to those on Wednesdays with the ability to kick you out of the group if I need to, if I don't like your question. That'll be super nice of me. Okay. Anyway, those are the two classes going on through the fall. Hopefully, one of them is interesting to you. I'll confess, I picked the first one, Church and Gender, because I thought, what could I offer that everyone in the church would tune into just to see, what crazy thing I said this week? I thought, that will do it. I'll have people angry at me from all directions. It's the perfect Bible class. So I expect 100% of you will be interested in one of these. That'll be available, videos and study guides available every week for 13 weeks for you to study along. So my point is, however you want to study and learn as a group, lots of options. Pick one. You just pick. There's not a wrong answer. Just pick one. Service. We want to serve together. That was part of the identification of the church. In Acts chapter 2, if you really read that carefully, they're taking care of the widows and the orphans, and it says they've had favor with all the people. Can you think of any other time in human history when the church had favor with all the people? They are universally adored for a very brief window in the book of Acts, and it's because of their service. There's a great letter written, I think it's the 2nd century, by a pagan priest, and it's a letter, he's one of the head pagan priests, and it's sent out to the people in the empire and to other pagan priests, and he's complaining, and he's saying, these Christians are nicer than us. Would you guys be nice to people? They are taking care of our widows. Of course people are converting to Christianity, and he's really mad about how kind Christians are because it's making his people look bad. That's Christianity at its best. That's perfect. So, as a small group, will you be taking on a service project as a group? Something you'd like to get involved in? Would you like me to suggest one? Right? I can't think of anything. That's my job. I can think of things. If you want to help in some way, there's always stuff that needs doing, and we'd be happy to get you tied into that. What will you need to make it happen? I'd like to do this, but I don't know if I have this available. We can make this available, whatever it is. We can find ways to make that possible. And then finally, care together. How will you be checking in on each other on a regular basis? Whether, again, it's in person, on the phone, communication in any format, make sure you're doing that. A couple of groups, potential groups, have already talked to me this last week about an interest in what we might call honorary members. And what they mean by that is we have a large number of shut-ins who we know won't be personally engaged in these groups. But there's no reason they couldn't be attached to your group anyway. That you kind of adopt them and say, we're taking care of that one. And you check in on them. And you let me know who it is. And you communicate with them on a weekly basis, even if they're never present for your group. I think that'd be a great thing to do. If you had 30 groups, which was our goal from last week, think of how easy it would be to check in on every isolated person that this congregation knows. It'd be so simple, just a few people for each group every week. It wouldn't be a problem. It'd be a great way to care for each other and, of course, for the people in your own group. You're kind of the first line of defense for prayer concerns, for special needs. If it's bigger than a group can handle, bring it to the church. We want to help. But by all means, if it's something you guys can handle amongst yourselves, that's a great first line of Christian defense for caring for each other. So how do we get started? A lot of talk today, and I apologize in advance. This is not my favorite kind of sermon where it's all information and process and not a whole lot of Bible. But as I said at the beginning, the only way for me to know you've heard me is for me to say it twice. So let me just go over this as quickly as I can and give you the details on how we're going to accomplish this. This week, if you're interested in hosting a group, as soon as possible, you need to let Naomi know. Why Naomi? Because I will forget. As a universal rule, I don't know if this is true for you, Bud, or not, but for my life, anything you tell me on Sunday is immediately forgotten. Yeah, okay, I'm not the only one. To the point that even Sunday evening, Celine will say something to me and I'll just kind of look at her glassy-eyed and she'll say, I'll send you an email. And I'll get it on Monday and remember what it is that she said. Sunday, my head is in a different place. If you tell me, Ben, I've got 5 groups for you, all I heard was wah, 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 wah. I don't hear it. And it's not because I'm not trying to listen. It's because I'm distracted. And I apologize for that. But Naomi remembers everything. She has this pencil and a piece of paper. And if you say, I'm interested, she'll put your name down and I'll get with you as soon as possible. We have these great little host information packets where we've put together all the information on last week's slides, all the information on this week's slides, all the CDC guidelines that I know you want to read so much, and the policy from the city of Ada regarding masks. So you have all the information you could possibly want to know, and then some, in one spot. It'll be available also online at some point this week if you want it that way, but if you're a person who likes the paper and pencil, there it is. We have 20 or so of those, 30 of those available on the table underneath the black billboard in the back of the auditorium, back of the foyer. So grab one of those, read it all. Ask Ben any questions you have. I have no persuasion whatsoever that at the end of today's sermon I will have answered all of your questions. Not possible. If I did 3 more of these, I still wouldn't have answered all your questions. So if you have a question, just ask, and we'll figure out how to make it work. There is inside of this a small group information sheet. There's also an online form that I can email you if you prefer that, and I'll try to get that to you this week. And it just asks the basic questions that we discussed today. How are you guys going to worship? Where are you guys going to meet? What you going to do? Okay? And then go recruit some people. If you got some folks that you think might want to be in your group, go get them in your group. If you say, I don't know anybody, but we sure like to try, let me know that, and we'll stick some people in your group. We'll ask some people nicely if they want to be in your group, and we'll help you form a group. But that's basically where we're at. If we could do that in the next week or two, we could have a lot of groups formed by the time September rolls around. What if you're not going to host? Everyone else. Real simple instructions. Someone's going to ask you to join a group. Say yes. Be willing to participate in some way. We're going to have, not today, but this coming Sunday, once I have some names on paper, we'll have some sign-up sheets for groups that have open enrollment. They'll be on the bulletin board in the back of the foyer if you want to walk by and sign up. I'm also going to flood you with emails in the next 2 weeks. Apologize in advance. But I'm going to give you some emails with information as groups become available so that you'll know kind of what you can get involved in. Watch for those emails and more group information and options as they open up. And that's it. It's surprisingly simple. It's not a big confusing thing. It's all conditioned on your willingness to participate. I'm sticking with my same goals. I'd really like to have about 30 of these by the end of August. I know it sounds like a large number. It's more than we had home teams before. But these are so flexible and so open-ended of how you do it. It seems like there's a lot of ways for this to happen. The reason I picked 30 is because before all this craziness happened, we were somewhere between 300 and 350 on a Sunday morning. And I thought if you had 30 groups that averaged 10 people, we would be in contact with our entire church body by and large, and maybe then some, right? And that would be a great accomplishment. I'm going to go ahead and get these ready to launch in September. You say, well, I'm not quite ready. That's okay. It's not a hard and fast deadline. I promise you, if you want to start a small group on the second week of September, I'm not going to slap your hand. We'll find a way to get that done, and that'll work too. The idea is to get engagement and activity in the church in healthy and reasonable ways. We'd like every member to be connected to a group in some fashion. Your level of involvement, your personal restrictions, and your personal guidelines for safety, we leave entirely up to you. We are not telling you how to make those decisions. But find a way to get connected with a group. If there's not a group that's connecting in a way that you think is safe and sound and good, start one that does it the way you think it should. There's lots of options here. So what I would encourage you to do is take a look at that, pay attention, watch for emails, and look for ways that we can continue to grow this program in the coming weeks. I'm really excited about this fall. I don't think it has to be a long, quiet march until we get a vaccine and things get back to where they were. I think instead it can be a time of growth. It can be a time of excitement. It can be a time of activity. We're going to see new Christian leaders flourish in situations we hadn't anticipated before. We're going to see people learning about Christ and coming to Christ in ways we hadn't imagined before. We're going to see service getting done. We're going to see love and fellowship in ways maybe we only hoped for before. We're going to want what's new to be normal forever. I really do believe that. and I'd like for you to give it a shot. Would you pray with me as we conclude today's lesson? Our Father and our God, we give you the praise for all the opportunities you've created in us today. We thank you for your willingness to be patient with your people, for your benevolent care that gives us resources and gives us the energy to go and to do what needs to be done in your name. Lord, we are attempting to be faithful in a difficult time. It's possible we're not doing it right, and we leave that up to you as well. If what we're doing is in your will, help it to thrive and flourish and give your kingdom its sure increase. If it's not what you want us to do, point us in a different direction, and may we be willing to run that way as well. In all things, we pray for your guidance and forgiveness and your patience and your love. This we pray in the name of Jesus, your Son. Amen.